everyone, welcome back to my kitchen. It's Christina from Our Wood Home, and today I'm going to be making some old-fashioned strawberry jam. Now, last year I made a version of this. It was raspberry jam, and I did a live video on my Facebook page, so I will link that somewhere in the description of this video. But I decided to do a strawberry jam making video today because that's my favorite type of jam to make, and it is the perfect time of year to be doing that. Right now we're about second week of July, and strawberry season here in Canada started last weekend. So I'm very excited to show you how I do this jam, and I hope that you enjoy this video. I like to do a vinegar and water soak on my berries, so about 4 parts water, 1 part white vinegar, just to make sure there's no bacteria on them, and I let that soak for a couple hours. And here are the tools that I use for my jam making. Not pictured is my potato masher, which I use later in the process. If you have any questions about these gadgets, feel free to comment and I will let you know as much as I know about them. I'm not going to give a commentary on everything I'm doing in this video because a lot of it is pretty self-explanatory, such as chopping up strawberries. I prefer to just cut the tops off with a knife and save a little bit of the fruit and the leaves for my chickens. And in the past, I've just left the berries whole and crushed them in the pot later, but I've also diced them beforehand, and it's really just a matter of personal preference. But keep in mind, the more liquid is in the pot when you start to cook, the longer it's going to take for it to cook down and thicken up. So just keep that in mind. Now, instead of using powdered pectin or a liquid pectin, I'm using a natural pectin, which is found in green apples. Really all apples and lots of other fruits as well. But through my research, I've determined that green apples, the Granny Smiths, have the highest concentration of pectin. So in this recipe, I used 7 cups of fruit, 2 cups of sugar, and then 2 average-sized grated Granny Smith apples. There's not really an exact amount of fruit to sugar and apples that I use, but I like to do close to half or 1/3 the amount of sugar per fruit. And with the apples, I err on the side of caution and use a little bit more than I might need, just to make sure my jam is really nice and thick. I try not to stray too far from the jam while it's cooking, just because it's easy for it to burn. And while I'm waiting for it to thicken up nicely, I try to assemble my workstation as well, get all my tools out and ready to go, so that when the jam is set, I'm not scrambling to try to get everything together. And for some reason, there's no footage of me filling the sink with my hot soapy water for my jars, but I did that. I put the jars and the flat lids in the sink to soak for a little bit, just to make sure they're nice and clean, and then I rinsed them thoroughly and set them on the counter to dry. As you can tell from this video so far, a large part of this process for making jam is just watching the pot, stirring it often, and after a little bit, setting in that candy thermometer to get a nice accurate temperature. Since we're not relying on commercial pectin and large amounts of sugar, we need to keep an eye on the temperature so that we know when it reaches the gelling point. Now, I believe that is about 225 Fahrenheit. I will put the exact number in the description of this video just for accuracy's sake. And as you can see from this clip here, it's not quite there, but it's getting close. So after a few more minutes of stirring and letting that simmer and get all bubbly and thick, I'm checking one more time to make sure the temperature is where I want it. At this point, since I've been doing jam this way for a fair bit of time, I know generally when it's set based on how it feels while I'm stirring it. And if you make jam this way, you may become comfortable using that method as well, but I still always suggest using a candy thermometer just so that you get an accurate reading and that you don't have to go back later and remake your jam. I'm speaking from experience. It's disappointing when your jam doesn't gel the way you had hoped. It's also worth noting that my camera, again, cut out during the part of filming where I put the jars, the clean, dry jars, into the hot oven. So I set my oven to the lowest setting on convection. I think that's about 170 degrees. And I put the jars in there, let them get nice and hot, but no hotter than that. And then when they reach 170, I just turn the oven off or keep it on warm to make sure the jars still stay hot. I've also put the flat lids in that little pot that's resting nearby, the gray and black one, and I've let those come to a boil as well. Not only does this help further sterilize them, but it keeps them nice and hot so that we can get a very good seal when we put the flat lids on the jars and tighten with the bands there. If you have never made jam before, or even if you have made jam, maybe you are unaware of how important it is to have hot jars and hot lids. So if the jars and lids are not hot, they won't seal properly. You won't get that nice suction, and if it doesn't seal, that means it's more prone to bacteria and mold, and you do not want that after you've spent all this time making lovely preserves. I have experimented in the past and not used very hot jars or lids, and I can tell you for sure it does not set and you risk contamination in your preserves. So on the other hand, you don't want scorching hot jars. I've made the mistake of heating my jars in the oven to about 350 Fahrenheit, and doing that means you're gonna get lots of foam and bubbles when you pour the hot jam in, and that's not really aesthetically pleasing. Plus you also risk cracking or shattering your jar when you put the hot liquid in. I'm speaking from experience again, it is not fun, do not do that. But overall, this jam making process is fairly easy, it's simple, it does take a little bit of time, but I like to think it's worth it. This way you know exactly what's going into the jam, and you can control how much sugar goes into it as well. So I hope that you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. If you did, please leave me a comment, let me know you liked it, or give this video a thumbs up. And if you enjoy this kind of content here on my channel, I hope that you will consider subscribing as well.